Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Movement as Medicine podcast, episode 7. I'm your host, Kevin Carr, with my amazing co-host, Brendan Rearick, just waking up at about 5:17 a.m. out in California. How you doing? You awake yet?
Yeah, much more awake than I was at 4:37.
Hey,
so that's good.
Get a little
and
caffeine
I'm on my
in
second cup of coffee now. Yeah.
All right. Nice. Well, how's everything going out there?
It was a busy week this week. Last week I had my CFSC in Los Altos, and we had 15 people. It went really, really well. Feels good to be back live with our events. I think in the last 2 weeks we've done 6 live events, and you've got another one coming up this weekend?
Yeah, it's been pretty crazy, actually. We had, 4 events in that one weekend? And then you had one last weekend.
And we had the winter seminar.
Yeah, I'm in the winter seminar hangover right now from last week. So, yeah, there's been a lot of education. So, yeah, we had that one weekend. I went to Maryland. You were in Chicago. Mm-hmm. Dan was in Ireland. And Pat was in Malta, New York. And then you got back-to-back weekends. So you were in Los Altos last weekend. We had the winter seminar. And, Steve Bigelow, Courtney Moulton, and myself are on our way to New York right after this. I got to sprint out of here and get to the train. And we have a CFSC Level 1 in Manhattan at the Strength Club with Kenny Santucci tomorrow. They just opened up over the last year. So, yeah, cool little gym. It'll be interesting to go check that place out. I haven't been to New York in a while, so I'm excited to get back there. That's always a fun weekend, and there's always a lot of great coaches there. Whenever we go to New York, I always say we could do a CFSC in New York pretty much every month, I feel like, because there's so many coaches and so many people looking for education that it's usually a really good place to go. So, yeah, I'm excited to go back there. But I'll just be tired on Monday because we take the last train out Sunday night after teaching. But looking forward to it.
Yeah, that's 3 straight weekends.
Yeah, and then nothing next weekend. I'm looking forward to that. I don't have any more teaching the rest of the month, so that's I'll use the rest of the month.
Yeah, neither do I. I actually have 2. I'm going 2 weekends in a row to Tahoe. So next weekend I'm skiing, and Rain's going to go snowboarding for the first time. That was her birthday present.
Nice.
So we got her a full day snowboarding lesson, and we've been trying to gear her up for that and explain to her there's a lot of falling and learning involved. So hopefully that goes well. And then the following weekend, Jenny and I are going back up there by ourselves, but no skiing, just resting.
Good for you guys. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of some bumps and bruises and learning for snowboarding, but pretty soon you'll be buying all the gear, so good luck with that.
Oh, I know. Hey, renting the gear, you might as well buy it at this point.
Yeah.
Because, but yeah, we've explained to her she's going to probably have a pretty sore bum and pretty sore probably wrists and knees by the end of the day. But that's a good thing because that means she's learning and getting better at it. We're just trying to put that in her head that it's not gonna be stand up and ride down the big hill the first time.
Listen, Uncle Kevin is going to dust off his snowboard instructor days and come out and work with Ray on this. So I'll get out there.
Uncle Kevin used to be quite the athlete. BMX, football, and snowboarding.
Yeah, now I'm just
not so much anymore.
Back in the day, I was an action star, but yeah, we'll have to get out there to Tahoe again. So. We're going to kind of keep this one moving this week because I know I have to sprint out of here, and I'm sure you got something to do today. We got some good stuff to talk about. We want to do a winter seminar recap. We'll do that later on in the podcast, kind of going through some of the topics, recurring themes. The whole experience went great last weekend. But then we have a great thread that we pulled off of strengthcoach.com that you had some great insight on and shared some great graphics with. If you want to kind of start off and ask, you want to recap the question that was asked? I put it in the show notes, and then we can kind of just dive right in. I'm sure we could talk about this for hours. So why don't you kick that off?
So the thread that was on Strength Coach was risk versus reward and durability. So the question was asked, Is strength training for performance the same as strength training for durability? Is it possible to be more durable but less explosive, or does higher strength and power in most situations translate to reduced injury risk? And on the flip side, is it possible to actually gain performance but increase risk of injury? What might be an example of that? So that brought up for me a moment about 10 years ago. It was the first time I attended one of our MBSC live educational events, and we were all in the brand new meeting room at MBSC. We had just opened the bigger bay, and we were all sitting in that room, and they had these whiteboards that Bruce Smack put up, and somebody was asking they were asking Mike what's the difference between what you do at MBSC versus like a CrossFit versus like rehab and stuff like that. Like, so like what's our like differentiator at MBSC? And Mike got into this risk versus reward thing. And I'm going to bring up the slide right now. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see it. If you can't, if you're listening to this, I will put it in the show notes as a Google Doc so you can open that up and see this. What he drew on the whiteboard, I'll just never forget it. And on one axis, you have reward. On the other axis, you have risk. So risk versus reward. And you have a linear line here. And he put 3 different bullet points. I have them as stars here in the picture. So on the low risk, low reward end, this is going to be your rehab and your machine-based or driven programming. So the risk is very, very low. You're not going to get hurt during rehab, and you're not going to you can't really get hurt on a machine. Leg extensions, chest press, cable machines. It's really, really difficult to get injured doing those things. But the reward is also much lower. Like, you're not going to get super fit and strong, or what we would call functional strength and conditioning, sitting down on a machine and extending your legs or pressing out in front of you. And rehab is very, very necessary. But nobody ever got really fit from stretching their hip and getting work done on their shoulder or getting their ankle mobilized. Like, the reason why you do that stuff in rehab is so you can do more difficult stuff later. Now, in the middle here, well, actually, I'll go to the other end. So on the far end, really, really high risk but high reward is any type of competition or survival-driven programming. So the strongest shall survive, which I think we might know some of these programs or systems that exist out there still. And if you can survive these programs, you'll get ripped, you will get strong, and you will be championed. And the problem is with those type of competitive survival-based systems or programs is we don't see all the people or we don't hear from all the people who failed or got injured or got left in the dust. Because all we hear about is the people who got ripped and strong and great. And they might have already been ripped and strong beforehand, or they might have gotten ripped or strong doing anything. It's almost like this type of programming, high risk, high reward, finds the genetically gifted.
Yeah, it's the survivorship bias.
Yes, and I saw that you wrote about the survivorship bias in another post. Actually, if you can go more into that after I show this.
Well, with
slide.
any of these things where you're like, oh, look at this really jacked person who did this program, or look how fit this person is, or work for them. We always see the people who come out the other side positively, right? But we don't often see the people who came out the other side negatively. And again, like you said, not inherently bad in certain situations. Like you said, competition, survival-driven program, things like if you're training to be a CrossFit competitor, you should probably train like that if that's what your goal is. Probably not a good option for most people. Same thing with like military style training, right? They probably need to do a lot of that shitty that work in the shit, like when you see like boot camp style training. And I don't mean boot camp like in the park, like Housewives from Winchester. I mean, like boot camp, like actual boot camp,
like buds.
And they they might actually need to do
tying
that
cinder blocks to their feet,
carrying boats. Like that's the stuff you see people try to replicate. Probably not a good option for most, but maybe necessary for that population.
Right. And somewhere in between rehab and machine-driven programming and survival competition-driven programming, we would say that's where MBSC lies, or Certified Functional Strength Coach. We lie right in between. So there's not so much risk that we're going to potentially injure someone to get a higher reward. And there's not so much reward that we are then going to risk somebody's. Let me say that again. I'm messing that up. There's not such low risk that we're not going to actually get somebody fit, strong, or get them to reach their goals. So this is what I'm calling functional, performance, or purpose-driven programming. And so that's where we lie right in between there. So it's like a Goldilocks' porridge. Not too hot, not too cold, just right. And again, we are trying to cast a really, really big net and catch a lot of fish. And we will not catch all the fish. So with the Certified Functional Strength Coach programming or our philosophy that we believe in, we'll catch most people, and we'll get about 80% of people. But there's a certain group, that 20%, that either needs the higher or lower risk versus reward. And like you were saying, survivorship or survivor bias type training, that's good for some people. That's what they need. But for the average population client or the average athlete, that's not the type of training that we're shooting for.
Yeah, actually, bring that image up again real quick, because I just want to highlight something real quick. In kind of going through that progression, if we work our way up, one of the things that I think about is, well, two things. Number one, I remember hearing Pat Davidson make a good analogy where he said most people you're going to train are like a really good Toyota Camry. Like, dependable, you're not going to drive it too aggressively, you're not going to like rip it off road. You can get to where you need to go, it can accelerate just enough, it's going to be dependable, not break down. Like, that's the 90%. You said we're going to catch most fish. I'm okay with not catching all the fish especially with Gen Pop, right? And that's kind of what the conversation was about initially. Whereas like down on the far end, the rehab end, like we're fixing the car, right? And we're rehabbing the car. And on the high end, it's like a Ferrari. Most people who come in to train at your gym don't want to be a Ferrari, don't need to be a Ferrari. They might have some aspirations back in their head, and that's okay. But for those that do want to be a Ferrari, or like my sweet TRD Tacoma that goes off-road, you might need to be more aggressive, right? And that's what you're going to do with your athletes. That's what you're going to do with the people at the top end, your combine athletes, your college football players, and even still in our setting, we're probably more conservative than most when it comes to training even those athletes, right? We're probably still going to be further down to the left on that graph. But understanding where people fit on that spectrum. And then another thing, realize like this graph is in context of like what you said, our functional training perspective, right? Because I guess machine driven programming, the reward could be very high if you had a bodybuilding client, right? Because machine based training could be very high reward in instances where you want to have as little variability as possible, as far as not a lot of variability in how the joint moves, right? And drive high amounts of volume and load into a specific pattern. Now, for the majority of people, the Toyota Camrys, if you will, that might not be the best choice, because we probably want options to provide more variability in how they move, because they're going to have greater carryover to activities of daily living and sporting ventures. However, if you're trying to drive adaptations into a specific muscle tissue or joint, or add as much volume as possible, a la bodybuilding, or actually in rehab situations, like sometimes those you want to use approaches like that in a rehab setting as well early on, that could be very high reward. So it's important to look at this as this graph specifically in context of training the average person. Again, always bringing it back to what we're talking about is the average person probably needs to be right smack dab in the middle. Even the average athlete probably needs to be smack dab right in the middle of what you highlighted there in that graph.
Yeah, I love
so
that
going
analogy.
to the question, the Camry.
I was gonna say if you think of it as from the standpoint of speed and the time it takes you to get there, risk versus reward. So the faster you go, the higher the risk, but the quicker you'll get there, and that's your Ferrari.
Mm-hmm.
So if your Ferrari can go 130 and you're going 130 the whole time, the risks of going 130 miles an hour are pretty high, but you'll get there faster.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're in your Camry and you're going 75 and you're going the speed limit, you're more likely to get there safely, but you're still going to get the rewards of getting to the same destination. But if you're driving a Prius and you're going 35, it's going to take you a while to get there. So I love that. I've never heard that, but we make most of our money training Toyota Camrys too. There's not a lot of Ferraris walking in through the gym doors. There's a lot more Priuses and Camrys coming through. And like you said, sometimes you have to punt the Ferrari to somebody else because that individual needs a special type of training. And we might
we're
not
just
be
trying
right.
to put that
and
extra.
CFSC is not.
Yeah, we're just trying to put that extra.
CFSC is not the right program for everyone. Yeah,
we're just trying to put that extra
upgrade.
package in, right? Like I want to get the super package in the Camry, so it's like a strong,
the turbo,
dependable, fast turbo Camry, but still is pretty good gas mileage, and it's not going to break down. That's the majority of people you're going to work with, right? And so, understanding that
we could put NOS and dual mufflers on a Toyota Camry, but it's still a Toyota Camry. Like that's
exactly.
So we can make it faster. We can soup it up, but it's still a Toyota Camry.
And so going back to the question, I think it's a good discussion here, where they said, is strength training for performance the same as strength training for durability? Is it possible to be more durable but less explosive or higher power, or does higher strength power in most situations translate to reduced injury risk? And it's a question of fitness, right? So yes, I think being stronger and more powerful in most, especially sporting situations, is going to reduce injury risk, right? Your ability to absorb force and produce force, the adaptations that happen at the cellular level, at the tissue, and an elasticity level in the tissue from power training, generally make us more resilient to stress, especially eccentric stress is where most people suffer soft tissue injuries. For a Gen Pop standpoint, yes, being stronger in a general sense is going to make them weak. There's plenty of research. Some research just came out like a week ago showing that just people who generally strength train obviously have lower all-cause mortality, lower risk of death from all causes, and live longer. So yes, getting stronger, more powerful generally helps. And then the follow-up question they ask is it possible to actually gain performance but increase risk of injury? Yes. We always talk about like those fast twitch athletes. Like you tend to see these athletes that are really explosive, very fast twitch, sometimes have increased risk of muscular strain. I think sometimes because they're so explosive that their tendons don't always catch up to the amount of force that they can produce. So it is a balance, right? But generally speaking, training is going to make people more resilient to stress, more fit for whatever task that they're training for, so long as the training lines up with the end goal activity.
And just to give everyone an idea of what this might look like for training, right? So us training an athlete for performance versus training somebody to just be healthy and more resilient, or this person's using the word durable. So, for example, our athletes will Olympic lift, so they will hang clean and snatch, barbell or dumbbell snatch. Our adults do not hang clean due to the risk not being worth the reward. Our athletes will trap bar deadlift, and they will pursue performance, and I'm going to call performance trying to get to double body weight. That would be performance for us, because athletes are going to take hits. So, for example, a hockey player skates at 20 miles an hour and hits the boards. Like, they need a different type of durability than the adult who has to go get their mail and go to work tomorrow morning. So with our adults, or our Gen Pop, we are going to not pursue heavy deadlifting. Grandma doesn't need to deadlift 225, regardless of what you see on Instagram and how cool it is that grandma can deadlift heavy. Most grandmas just want to not break their hip and be able to drink wine and play cards with their friends. They don't want to deadlift 225. Like, great for grandma, but the laundry basket is only 3 pounds. So we're not going to trap our deadlift with our Gen Pop or adults for that reason, because the risk is not worth the reward. Hops. So jump is on 2 legs, bound is right to left, left to right. So our adults will jump and bound, but they don't hop due to the risk of injury. So hops are same leg to same leg plyometrics. All our athletes do it because the risk is worth the reward. So we want to train that ability to absorb forces on one leg to avoid things like Achilles tears, ACL injuries. So all our athletes do hops, but our adults do not hop on one leg. Now, there's an exception to every rule. Someone will say, yes, I saw somebody at I saw an adult at MBSC doing a hop. So if it's a personal training client and they're very high training age, yes, occasionally there is an exception to the rule. But for the most part, in group training with a lot of people, we do not hop, trap bar, hang clean, or snatch, and we don't run sprints. Like, we don't run time sprints with our adults or Gen Pop. Like the hamstring tear, the ankle roll, the trip and fall is just not worth it. So with our adults, we run things like tempo runs. We do more type circuit training, like people would call these metcons, metabolic conditioning, where you do ropes, you push a sled, and then you do the bike. Like, we don't do that really with athletes because the goal is performance. Like, doing a metcon is not, it's just going to make you average at everything, which is what we want for durability and for our adults. But our athletes, we don't want them to be average. We're going to increase the risk for our athletes because we need that extra reward for their performance on the field, court, ice, or whatever, because there's a higher risk for injury in the field of play than there is in general activities of daily life. And you could still get hurt doing your general activities, but there's less exposure to risk just living your daily life than playing a competitive sport. I'm going to pause for a second there so you can answer that, but I do want to then address after this, what's the difference between an athlete and between general pop? Or what's the difference between training for sports performance versus training for durability and health? Like, how do you categorize those people? Because everyone wants to raise their hand and be like, well, I'm an athlete, but
yeah, sure, yeah.
Have at it.
I have 2 good little notes on when you talked about specifically the hops and the sprinting. So I'll go back and tell a story, and I'll kind of talk about hopping in the group specifically, because I think they're important, but how you coach it, how you program it matters. And so I remember early on having a woman who she'd been training with us for a few weeks, and I was early in my career coaching the adult groups at NBSC, and I remember being like, yeah, let's try hopping over a hurdle. And sure enough, like, she got through the first round and she was like all over the place. I'm like, gosh, she'll get better. And then she jumped over the second hurdle on her second set and she rolled her ankle freaking bad. And I remember seeing her face being like, I remember like the look of like how upset she was. not just because her ankle was swelling up the size of a grapefruit, but also because I remember her saying, well, I'm a hairdresser. Like, I don't think I can go to work tomorrow. Like, talk about risk versus reward. I don't know. Hairdressers generally are a lot like trainers in that, like, if you don't work, you don't get paid. It's not like they have a salary and paid days off. Typically, they're usually private independent contractors, renting chairs and whatnot. So I remember thinking like, oh shit. And like her being like, the look on her face being like, oh man, like, I don't know how I might be out of work the rest of the week. That's a risk versus reward conversation. And like me as a young coach probably should have known, like, probably should have kept her on 2 legs the whole time. Right. Lesson learned for me there. Luckily she was okay after a couple of days and iced it and moved it. She was good to go and she's still with us. But thinking about that, I always go back to that when I look at my adult groups and I see them doing plyos. I always think like, who's going to be the hairdresser in the group? And I don't want that to happen. And I'll say that while also saying that I have people in my adult group who do single leg hops, but you go risk versus reward. Every decision we make in a training context is balancing those two things. And so in my adult group, I have some people who I would definitely not do hops with, either because of their orthopedic history, their knees, their ankles. Maybe they're a little overweight. Maybe their coordination isn't great. So I'm like, yeah, we do 2-leg jumps on a box, over a hurdle. We do bounds, typically, like you said, much easier for them to land when they're not hopping and landing off the same foot. In that same group, I also have people who are probably in their early 30s, still play recreational sports. Like I have a couple guys that play men's league hockey, a couple guys that play men's league basketball, a woman that's a runner, and I do hops with them while the rest of the people do jumps. Now, I typically start everybody on like either hopping over the rungs of a ladder, like an agility ladder, so they barely have to get off the ground, or over a 6-inch hurdle. And sometimes with the adults, all the adults will be like, hey, if we are going to do hops, we're going to just do ladder hops. Because it's more about single leg hip stability.
It's a line.
And just their ability to jump and land. It's a land. So line hops we do. But we're typically not going to provide much elevation. And we're almost certainly, for the majority of adults, not going to do things like continuous elastic hops. Unless I have someone who's still competing, like you said, in an adult setting where they are still competing in some sort of sport, then they kind of fall into that athlete bucket still, right? And that's the question that you're going to go over next. And real quick note on the sprinting thing, not timing sprints with adults. This was a conversation we had in our staff meeting just a few weeks ago, because we always keep the timers set up at all times. Because the athletes are always out, but the adult groups are going.
And the adults see them.
One of those situations. Yeah. Oh God, they're like kids. If you have the biggest hurdle out, they're going to try to jump over it. If you have the biggest box out, they're going to try to jump on it. I have a guy in my group who's like 70 years old, a little over 70. And of course, he's former very good athlete, but he's like 70 something years old, a ton of injuries. And he goes, 48-inch box. And he goes over, and I see Mike's face from the distance being like, no. And Tukey, his name is, runs up, jumps. I mean, he freaking jumped up on it, but I was like, oh my God, like this guy's going to fucking hurt himself. And so you have to like kind of temper expectations and sometimes put the distractive toys away to the side. Like the timers were out. And before we knew it, the group had self-organized, like while they were running tempos, like, we're going to run sprints. And like Dan and I weren't there. The adults were running through the timers as fast as they could because the time is up on the wall. Like it, and so there's a bunch of 50, 60-year-olds sprinting as hard as they could. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to see an Achilles tear. I'm going to see a hamstring tear. And Mike is like, no, pull the timers. And they were all butthurt for a week. We're like, listen, you guys can do tempo runs, but like probably not great for you to be doing 10 full effort sprints, because they're supposed to be doing tempos. They're supposed to do 10 tempo runs. They turned into 10 full effort sprints up and back through the timers. And so again, risk versus reward. I looked at that and was like, probably not worth it. All these people have to go to work after they leave here today, and if they're all limping around, it's probably not going to be the result that they wanted or that we intended. So that brings you.
I appreciate
what is an athlete.
Yeah, I appreciate the competitive nature of that group, but a lot of people have that still inside of them. I mean, that's what makes group training so great, is as much as you want to say like it's about each individual, they know who's in their group. Everyone's got an eye on somebody and what somebody else is doing, and it keeps you motivated a little bit. But again, if they get hurt on your watch, that's your fault for allowing it to happen. This was a strengthcoach.com question a while ago, and somebody was asking, like, okay, so what makes somebody an athlete, right? So for me, you are an athlete or a competitor, right? You participate in a competition that keeps score, and there's a winner and loser, and there are playoffs. Okay, so there's a winner, there's a loser, there are playoffs, and they keep score. Okay, so backyard basketball is not a competitive sport. Golf, like, maybe yes or no. But now here's my second caveat. Your heart rate needs to get above 70%. So that makes golf not a competitive sport. That makes curling or bocce ball or bowling not a competitive sport. Like, they're not doing sports.
You're saying you're
training.
excluding things that you can drink during, it sounds like.
Yes. So maybe that's
if you can have a beer in your hand.
If you can have a beer in your hand, I like that, actually. That's easier than the heart rate thing. So if you can have a beer in your hand, and you fall into the everything else, and then that's what we call general population health benefit training, durability training, resilience training. Like, it's everybody else. Okay, so an athlete is,
as you start to move towards more risk-averse choices, right?
Correct. So that brings me to my next point: is athletic training or sports performance training carries a higher risk with it, but a higher reward. So that's what makes you, in my opinion, an athlete. Is there's a competition where they keep score, there's a winner and loser, and there's playoffs or a champion at the end, and your heart rate gets relatively high, and you don't drink a beer during the competition. That's a newly added standard. And then there's everybody else.
In sports now that I can drink beers during.
That makes you a general population client, Kevin.
Proud member.
So I just want to distinguish that, because there's I always get that question, like, why am I not considered an athlete? Like, why is this a general population group? Like, if you like to run 5Ks, you're probably not going to fall into that. Like, yeah, you're getting your heart rate up and you're competing with yourself, but, like, there's no playoff, there's no championship. It's like,
and there's no
hobby.
There's no reward, really. Like, I know Mike always says, like, if your paycheck or your scholarship depends on your competitive experience, like you competing, then you're an athlete, right? Even if that, like, I have a guy like Matt who competes in bike racing still, and competes in downhill mountain biking still, and gets prizes and stuff. Like, he's like on the border of, like, he's 50. But, like, on the line of, like, athlete and gen pop. Some of our choices are a little more aggressive from a performance aspect. Some of our choices are a little bit more conservative because his injury history at his age. And that's generally the track of decision making you follow for everybody. But, like, as you start to trend towards more risk averse, you're probably more gen pop. And as you start to trend towards more reward and more aggressive training, then you're probably more athletic in nature, right? And everybody exists on that spectrum in some capacity, right? So
to summarize this, and that way we can talk a little bit about the seminar before you need to go. To summarize this, there's a spectrum of risk versus reward, and there's a amount of risk you need to be willing to give up in order to get a certain amount of performance. And if you don't go there, you might not get the performance training that you need or the benefits that you need. but also remember it in you brought it up, the context of what the individual needs. So if they need to be able to do simple daily activities and go to work, that requires a different amount of risk than somebody who needs to get on the ice and skate and compete for a championship or compete for a paycheck or compete for a scholarship. And those two things are going to require different risks. And that's how we would distinguish the difference between durability training, so your Toyota Camrys, and sports performance training, where you're trying to create a Ferrari or you're trying to soup up your Toyota Camry.
Very well stated, Brett. Good job. It's almost like you wrote a whole forum thread on this. So
almost.
We're going to get, that was really good. So we're going to talk about the winter seminar a little bit. It went awesome. It was, as always, it's like a good reunion weekend. I wish you were there. Because a lot of our friends come to town, like Drew Massey was at my house, as you guys saw from the podcast last week. Felix came. Our friend Giuseppe and his buddies from Italy came over, and Raul and Jordi from Spain, our CFSC partners over there, came over, and then all of our friends kind of from all over the U.S., kind of who have been part of CFSC or MBSC in some way, all kind of come for the weekend. So it's always a good time between the seminar and then obviously the social after. Is always pretty enjoyable, but it was after a hectic 2 days and some great presentations. I kind of took the time to digest it this week, and I went back, looked at some of the slides. I got the videos back. I actually watched some of the videos yesterday and kind of just tried to get my perspective on each talk again. Because sometimes when you're sitting there for 2 straight days, like you're writing notes and you're thinking, and at the end of the day, you're like, I don't even know what I learned today. So you got to go back and kind of recap. And it's interesting. We had a wide array of speakers. So we had, Nicole Rodriguez came and talked about youth development with low equipment, right? Like in Poland, she's training soccer kids from, 9 all the way up to 18 out on a field, on a pitch with like no equipment most of the time. How does she deal with the specialized athlete with low equipment to make them healthy and durable and be able to perform at a high level? Les talked specifically about speed development, almost entirely about training football players for the combine and how they look at speed development. Mark Fitzgerald kind of talked about his overall training philosophy from his experience in the NHL to owning a private business. I spoke about managing the back pain client. Mike spoke about orthopedic cost, very controversial. And literally what you just said, weighing risk versus reward. Dan had a similar topic, specifically talking about training adults. It was very, very, very good. Dan McGinley's talk was outstanding. Vinny talked about building a nutrition coaching system and working on behavior change. And then Steve talked about kind of client retention, keeping clients for long periods of time, and how to, 1, from a relationship standpoint, do that, and 2, from a programming standpoint, do that. So we had a huge variety of topics. But the theme that I think I heard everybody say this, either exactly say these words or summarize it in what they said, was meet the client where they're at. It was like I literally heard that phrase like 100 times over the course of the weekend. And no matter what the actual specific topic was, it came back to that singular concept that we need to meet the client where they're at, whether that's psychologically, whether that's from a nutrition standpoint, whether that's from a speed development power standpoint, whether that's from a pain standpoint, and bring everything back to that. Like for instance, like for mine, I spoke much about the communication aspect of dealing with someone who has chronic back pain, because they want a cause and effect to their back pain, which is typically not the case with chronic back pain. So going back to what their needs, their desires, their wants, their desired outcomes of training are, and kind of what their expectations for training are, and then building a program from there. Nicole talked about, being resourceful, specifically in a training situation that, like, if you don't have equipment and you have athletes who you need to prepare for a specific sport, meet them where they're at from a, especially in European soccer, like their expectation for training is much different than ours. Meet them where their expectation is and try to build a program from there. And then Steve Bigelow kind of talking about long-term client retention, how to continually move the target or provide variation without change to continue to get them to train for years at a time as their life changes. And so it was like a recurring theme the entire weekend, which I thought was really good because we didn't intend that. We didn't discuss that. But it just kind of came up that way, and it was highlighted in the Q&A by some people's questions and their comments afterwards. And I thought that was really, really interesting.
That makes me think of the begin with the end in mind. Yeah, when you meet somebody for the first time and they tell you what their goals are and you do an assessment on them, you say, okay, based off of what you're telling me and what I'm seeing, this is where you would need to be in, we'll say, 6 months. And you work the program backwards from there to meet them where they're currently at. Mm-hmm. So once you do that, you might say, well, this is actually going to take you 9 months, or this might actually take you only 6 weeks, right? So, but you start with the end in mind. What do we want? What's our timeline? What's our duration? What are the goals? And then you work that program all the way back down to where they're at, and then you build them back up. So that's what that brought up for me while you were talking about that. Yeah,
like in my context, I know I can speak probably more directly about what I talked about in my presentation, was like when people have back pain and we want to get them fit, we always want to put them into our box. Hey, you need to deadlift, you need to do squats, you need to do push-ups, you need to bench, you need to do whatever, right? We always say, like, we're going to get them really strong, we're going to get them fit. And like you said, it's the grandma deadlifting, like, is the thing you always see. But like the majority of the clients that come in, you probably don't give a shit about deadlifting at all. They are training with
they just want to be out of pain.
Get back. Yeah, and
I just want to be out of back pain.
There's probably typically it's not even necessarily the pain that they even comment if you ask them. It's, I want to get back to being able to go hiking. I want to get back to being able to play with my kids. I want to get back to being able to go and do a 5K, every now and then without worrying about my knee or my back hurting. They never even really say like, hey, I want to feel better every day. It's find out what they actually want. And when you do that, and then you can start to find training approaches that get them there, whether it's what you want or what they want, it's probably a better approach. And so what I said was like, it's probably more important that we listen to what the client wants rather than they listen to us tell them what they need. And like, it's often like, oh, we need to get stronger here. Well, I always ask like, okay, where do you want to be in 6 months? Why is that important to you? And then how can we build a plan? Like you said, begin with the end in mind. How can we build a plan to get you to that? And that is, Vinny talked about it with the nutrition piece, right? Like, meet them where they're at is like, we always talk about trying to teach nutrition. It's like, sometimes you got to start at like, what is a protein? What is a carb? How do you cut your vegetables? Like, people can't, Vinny talked a lot about like, I don't talk about nutrition unless they like start to even know like, okay, how do I prepare foods? Like, just work on, meet them where they're at. Like, we always want to bring them to learn about like intermittent fasting or, low carb diet or something. Like, dude, these people like eat McDonald's every day. They don't think twice about what they eat. So like, you have to start at behaviors first. And so again, that was the recurring theme, whether it was pain, performance, client relationships, everything came back to that same theme, because at the end, to get behavior change, that's really what matters, to tap into the client's desires and motivations. And so it was just funny that like, we didn't plan that theme, but it came back to the same theme over and over, because I think a lot of people who are actual coaches, like, we try to prioritize bringing in the people who actually coach to educate other trainers. They understand that kind of implicitly because they've dealt with people enough.
So you want to give them what they want and sprinkle in what they need. That's a famous quote from a book that a coach wrote. I don't know if you know what book that is. Coaching Rules.
That's in that Coaching Rules. That Coaching Rules book.
That Coaching Rules book. Shameless plug. Where is that going to be available, Kevin? Yeah, I doubt it.
So the winter seminar,
where will that be available to watch?
We should have it up on NBSC TV next week. So quick note, if you're an NBSC TV member listening to this, it is going to be an additional purchase. But if you buy it, it'll just be added to your account, whereas it's going to be, because it's going to be sold publicly For people who are non-MBSC TV members, if you were someone who attended the seminar, you'll get access to that for free. Well, not for free, you paid for it. You'll get access to it once it is available. So hopefully we'll have that up next week. I just got the recordings back, so I'm getting those edited and put up in the next few days here. And so it'll be available on MBSC TV on demand if you're listening to this. Hopefully by the time you're hearing this, hopefully it's available.
Awesome. Book recommendations and then go? All right.
Yeah,
my
sure.
book recommendation this week is, I do, 90% Mental by Bob Tewksbury. It's an awesome book about and he's a baseball sports psychologist. So he was a baseball pitcher himself, and he mostly works with baseball pitchers from the major leagues. So like John Lester with when he was on the Boston Red Sox and then the Chicago Cubs. I forget a couple of the other athletes, but it's a fascinating book about how to overcome the noises in your head, especially in a sport like baseball that is it's a lot of games. It's a very individual sport, and there's a lot of failure in baseball. So there's way more failure in baseball than there is in any other sport. So, for example, in baseball, if you hit the ball 3 out of 10 times, you're really good. Like that's
crazy.
So that means you're failing. Yeah, you're failing 7 out of 10 times, and it's okay. But that's really hard to mentally get over that hurdle compared to most other sports where there's not that much failure. And if there is failure, it's a team failure. Whereas in baseball, it's an individual. Like there's no other person at bat with you other than you. And so if you have a poor batting performance, that's your fault, not any of your teammates. So that book was very 90%. Yeah, 90% Mental by Bob Tewksbury.
Yeah, that was a book club book that Mike gave all of us. And at first I was like, oh, is this going to be good? And I was like, yeah, ones I didn't start for like the first week or so. And then I went in, I was like, oh, this was very, very, very good.
It does start slow because it's a lot of his just story, not the psychology stuff. But then it picks up once he starts talking about the strategies that he used. Like the mental imagery stuff is very fascinating. The meditation and breathing stuff. So yeah, I loved it. I got to re-listen to it now that I've mentioned it.
Yeah. You have it on audio?
Yeah.
It's on Audible?
Very good on Audible.
Oh, so I didn't know that. I might download the Audible. So mine this is one I give to clients. I have a bunch of copies to give to clients. It's called Why Do I Hurt? By Adrian Lowe. It's actually it's made for clients, but generally all the ones that are made for clients I like better than the actual book.
Yeah, that's like
it's simple.
Like I said, Back Mechanic. Back Mechanic by Stuart McGill is one of my favorite books, and it's written for clients. Yeah, and it's awesome.
And so this is a patient book about the neuroscience of pain, and so like why that pain can sometimes be unpredictable, or pain is not necessarily associated with injury, and why pain can be chronic and persistent. And one, it gives some basic strategies for them to deal with it, understanding outside of just the mechanical, biological piece, that it's also your stress management and your sleep and all these things that impact your pain. Because sometimes as a coach or as a therapist, if you're not always selective with how you say it, it can make them think you're telling them it's all in their head and that they're crazy. And I'll give them this because it helps them understand that, like, no, it's like that's your body working the way it's supposed to. And so it'll kind of give them the education. This is by Adrian Lowe, and it kind of just helps set guidelines. I think it's a must read if you're a coach and you're going to be dealing with people in pain, or a therapist and you're dealing with people in pain. And if you want to dive into actual textbooks, that's great. But this probably is a really, really, really good place to start for both patient and coach and therapist. So I keep copies of these in my lobby. I have a bunch of them, and like I'll give them a load.
I was going to say I'm going to purchase one myself.
Yeah,
I'm going to purchase one right after this.
Yeah.
Okay. I've never heard of it.
There's a lot of pictures, Brendan. So I know you're a big picture book guy. Yeah, like lots of good pictures and things. So
nice. There we
that'll
go.
Be perfect for you.
Yeah. All right.
So, awesome.
I'll be purchasing that as soon as we're done here. Yeah. Well, I know you got to go. So.
Got to head to the South Station, hop on the old Amtrak train.
work for the next 4 hours. I love the Amtrak.
Yeah. So, well, everybody, thank you for listening. Quick episode. We're about 50 minutes this week, but that's just fine. Hopefully, we'll be back next week. And thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening. Thanks, Kev.